gotten 2 more of them done. I have 1 left to do, but I needed to stop and talk about camshafts for a second. This is a stock MR-A8 camshaft setup that we've been using, and we're having layover problems at the higher RPM because obviously these weren't designed to, you know, flow at 10,000 RPM. So after making some phone calls, we are going to send these out for a regrind. Custom cams, like actual, like true custom cams, are just way too expensive, take way too long. This is a one-off application. Might have to start doing this on other builds because we are seeing a bit of layover on other builds as they rev out a lot higher. So we're going to send these out. We're going to check that the profile is the same as the Juke one, which I believe they are, based off of the specs that Nissan gives. And then we're going to have these modified. And we're going to go a little more aggressive on these than we did do with our Juke cams that we have made, just because this is purely a race car. We don't care if we got to idle this thing at 2,000 RPM to keep it running. So I'm going to disassemble these, get these boxed up and shipped out. Unfortunately, it's going to delay finishing the whole long block, as it's going to take, you know, 2-3 weeks to get these made up. But we can get a majority of it done. We just basically won't do the timing cover and the timing stuff. So gonna box these up and then finish this up. So I went and cleaned up the hole for our vent, and I also cleaned this hole up because I have a couple of these fittings. I'm actually just gonna weld a fitting on there. We have like a push-in thing that we usually use, but just gonna convert it to AN. Benefit of that also is, for some reason, if we ever need a different return or we need more ventilation or whatever, we now have, you know, the same exact fitting on the back of the block. So these are all cleaned up as good as you can get cast. So I'm going to go ahead and just weld those on. All right, so we got that all welded on. I did nick the threads when I was doing some cleaning to try to get some weld in there, but as long as this upper part doesn't get damaged, it's fine. Welding to cast is my least favorite thing in the world to do. So I'm going to let that cool down, and then once that's cooled off, we're going to clean this entire thing completely, like really clean it, and get ready to actually start putting stuff together. All right, so we have the camshafts that got sent out for this, but we're at least going to get the bottom half of it put together and as much as we can put together while we're waiting for those to come back. So the next thing we got to do before we can put the crank back in it is we need to modify our caps to be that size so that we can fit this girdle in there. Now, could we just not run this? Sure, but if it's available, why would you not? This definitely strengthens up everything and stops stuff from moving around. So I'm just going to measure this, measure that, subtract it, and that's the difference that we need to mill this down. Now, this little bump up in here, I'm sure that little bit of material helps some sort of strength, but it's not an amount that's going to really make that much of a difference. It's a very small amount, actually. I think it's like, yeah, it's not a lot at all. So we're just going to cut it down flat just because it's easier for us to do that. The milling process would be a lot more complicated if we tried getting that exact shape. So we're going to measure these and then set them up in the machine and then start cutting. So we're all set up in the mill. I have it set so that my Z0 is minus 0.33 of an inch, which is the height difference. It's all leveled. So we're going to go ahead and just cut this down very slowly because we can't mess up. Now, before anybody gets all uppity about the condition of the chip blockage on the mill, it's about $5,000 to $6,000 for the actual encasement for this thing, which I do not need. So, you know, this works for what I do. So, you know, if you want to send me $6 grand to make it look pretty, go for it. But we're gonna go ahead and cut this. So I get the feeds and speeds dialed in. It's 0.03 depth of cut, 0.33, oh, sorry, 0.03 width of cut, 0.33 depth of cut, running at 21. 21 inches a minute. So we've got this pretty much. I could write a program for it, but I'm just doing it by hand. Incredibly satisfying. So that's one done. That's what it started like. That's what we finished, and that's our goal. Now you're going to be asking, why don't we just put these onto the other block? Well, these are actually line bored specifically to the blocks that they go on. So if we put this on there, we would have to get it line bored again, which isn't a cheap process. So it's easier just to modify the ones that are already on that block to make it work. So now we just have to do that 1, 2, 3, 4 more times. So do that. All right, so we have all of these modified. I just gotta clean them up a little bit and remove the old bearings. I leave those in there to kind of protect the surface in case anything gets dropped or anything like that. But they're all cut down. I got bored with cutting the same pattern over and over again, so I kind of played around a little bit. But they're all completely flat. No crazy burrs. I forget how thick the middle one is. It's like huge. So clean that up, and then we'll get going on our bearings. We have King bearings going in, and we have a support here. Now these bolts, I did measure them. They are reusable, but just because of the stress this engine's going to be under, we're going to just replace them with some brand new ones. Nissan has a thing, it's on this wall somewhere, about measuring the bolts to see if you can use them again. So I'll put these aside as some spares, but we are going to use some fresh ones. So we have to check our bearing clearances, which we have our plastic gauge in here. I have yet to come across one of these that doesn't take just standard bearings, so take that as you will. Can get them in different sizes if need be, so we'll find out if this is the same case. What I'll do is we'll clean these areas up again with some lint-free cloths, set the bearings in there, put the crank in, put the plastic gauge on, torque them all down, untorque them all, and then check our plastic gauge thickness, write them all down so we have a record of it, and then go from there. So I'm gonna get that process started. All right, so we got our upper bearings in. Checked everything is clean. Let's drop the crank in there. Crank is in. We're gonna rotate it as little as possible. There's no lubrication in here because this is just to check clearances. So next we'll put the bearings in all the main caps, put the main caps on, girdle on, bolts on, torque it. I'll obviously put the plastic gauge in first. Let's see where we end up. I'm gonna breathe very lightly. So we have our plastic gauge sitting on all of them, but you can do it one at a time, but because of the cradle, I like to just get them all on there. So now we'll put the mains on and see what goes on. Alright, that's all hand tight, so now we're going to fully install this. These are the old bolts. Just not going to use the new ones yet, because this is just checking. So first we want them all to be 25 foot-pounds. And the next step involves a protractor. It's 70 degrees. Past 25 foot-pounds is what they want. So we'll get this in here. We'll set it to 0. So now that we've gone through all that effort, we now undo it all, starting from 10 and working our way back. They are all 2-spec. I was going to write it down, but I don't have paper and pen, and I'm covered in oil, so that's not happening. And for the sake of transparency, you'll notice this bearing is different. I actually dropped and damaged the bearing that was supposed to go there. You can see some scratches on it. So I actually have I don't have any more King mains. So that's a Nissan main, and also under there a Nissan main. So just so everybody's on the same page. So this is all within spec. I'm gonna go ahead and clean off the mains, clean off the bearings, get some assembly lube, and do the final assembly of the crank. All right, so it's time to put the actual bolts in. Now when you do the actual torquing, like final torquing, I just don't do it for the initial because it's messy. You take your bolt, I have some oil here, brand new motor oil, get the threads nice and wet. Drop that into the hole. Do that with every single one. This is what Nissan wants you to do. I'm going to get a little bit of it on the seating surface as well, again, per Nissan. And we'll go through and tighten them down. Alright, that's all torqued down. She spins freely, there's no binding spots. Now for the pain in the butt part, which is putting the pistons in and then doing the rod bearings, and this is just a pain in the ass part to do, so let's get it over with. I'm going to preface this by saying I hate doing this. Me and the piston ring compressor are not friends. We don't get along. It's not a good relationship. Probably should look for a divorce. Unfortunately, you know, it's what I got. So what we do here is we soak the first cylinder we're going to do in oil so that everything is nice and lubricated. I even put a little bit around the rim up there. And then I put this contraption over the piston, which I'll show you that once it's done. And then we hope it goes in one shot. It usually doesn't go in one shot. I'm terrible at this part of this for some reason. I don't know why. So, you know, you can YouTube how that works, but that's how the compressor goes. And then we go ahead and we put this in with a little dimple facing towards the exhaust side. Get the skirt in there. And let me put this down. And get the rubber end of my big bar. Make sure it's in there square. Hey, that one went in. That's exciting. Holy crap. All right. So it's just that process over and over again. So I'm going to get to that. Now, I was like, I'm not going to bother filming it. It's going to be a waste of memory and battery, but I should have because I got all of the first shot, of course, when I'm not filming. So those are all in there. We're going to very gently flip this over and start with a pair of rods because the way the crank is shaped, 2 of the rods will be up at the same time, so they're easy to get to. So go ahead, flip it over and do that. All right, so we have the cylinder 2 rod up and then the plastic gauge on there. Make sure we line up this the right direction. Put that on. Now I'm doing this dry just to avoid getting oil everywhere. You can do this wet, which is how you're supposed to do final install. So, there. And that's 45 foot-pounds is what I do on these rods. Because these are ARP bolts, so they don't behave like a normal Nissan steel bolt. So, 45, check this one. Okay, now undo it. Very counterintuitive, I know. One. Now, these are an extremely tight fit, So I back these off a little bit and then give it some taps to drop the rod. Make sure not to hit this too hard because it will obviously crush your plastic gauge. So I'll now take this out. We have our plastic gauge mark on both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and measure this up and see if it's in spec. So that measured out to a 038, which is within spec. Nissan spec is 037 to 047 with an 07 as your high limit. So right in spec. So I'm going to clean this off and I'm going to do a final install of this rod so that it's done. And then I'm going to do this for the other three and I will show you that when it's done. All right, we are all piston and rodded up. She spins smooth, with the exception of, you know, my mechanics on my arm not allowing me to do it fast. She goes smooth, so we'll flip it over, clean the deck surface again, just to verify it's clean. And I think we're gonna pop the head on it and go from there. So my deck is clean, so let's put the alignment dowels in. I actually make my own out of this copper pipe. I've had this like 10-foot long section of copper for probably 8 years now that I've cut these out of. And I do this over the Nissan ones because these will expand outward evenly and they'll expand pretty quickly because they are copper and, you know, it heats up a bit faster than this. It's also thinner, which will push outward and hold the head in more of an alignment. The Nissan ones work fine. They're like a spring style one. They have a slot in them. This is just how I've done it. And you don't have to do it like me, but that's those. And now we're gonna thread in all of our ginormous head studs. And I don't think you guys need to watch me thread these in because it can take a hot minute. So I'm gonna thread these in and then we'll lay the head gasket and put the head on. All right, so the big head studs are in. That's quite intimidating. They're all in there. So now we're gonna put our thick head gasket in. It has been modified to fit around these big studs. I'm gonna not film this process because I gotta kind of shimmy it down. So I'll show you guys once it's done. All right, head gasket is on. That thing is thick. So now we're gonna go and put our cylinder head on, which they skimmed that so it's nice and clean and dry and ready to go. So let me set this up and I'll put that on. Sorry, I didn't film that. It was a bit of a struggle to get it on. You can see, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. It's a really snug fit on these studs. So I ended up actually taking out the middle studs and just putting it down on the 4 outer ones. And then I put the studs in after, just because that would be easier instead of scraping everything up. So that's all on now. So now we have to do the process of putting on the bolts, the nuts and washers, which it's a tight fit. So we'll let's see how that goes.